Good day. Yesterday, at the start of my programme, I spent a considerable amount of time discussing the Ukrainian raid into Belgorod, the apparent attempt to attack and capture some Russian border villages, perhaps in order to distract attention away from the defeat in Bakhmut and to raise morale within Ukraine itself, perhaps also to try to get the Russians to divert troops from more critically important parts of the front line to defend Belgorod itself, perhaps also an attempt by Ukraine to raise civilian morale within Ukraine itself, where obviously the news of Bakhmut will have come as a significant blow. Though I ought to say that at the time of making of this program, Ukraine has sort of not denied that the Russians have captured Bakhmut, but there's been no official announcement, no positive, straightforward admission that Bakhmut is indeed under Russian control. Well, as the hours progressed, we got confirmation from the Russian Defense Ministry, or at least the Russian Defense Ministry claimed that the incursion had been repelled with heavy losses, and that the troops, the Ukrainian troops who participated in this operation, had been driven back to Ukrainian territory. Now, the Russian Defense Ministry issued a statement, published a statement, which it then embedded later on in its greater summary, larger summary of the events of the 23rd of May. I'm going to, across the entire battle fronts, I'm going to just read what it said, what it says, just to give an idea of what the overall situation in terms of this Belgorod attack was, as discussed by the Russians. They say, and this is, as I said, I want to stress again, this is a Russian statement, the Kiev regime defeated in Artyomovsk, that's to say Bakhmut, but from now on I'm going to slowly start to refer to the place as Bakhmut, at least when we're speaking about it as a town, rather than as a battle. I think the Battle of Bakhmut has now become so widely used and accepted, including in Russia itself, by the way, that when I refer to the battle, I'm going to continue to use the name Bakhmut. But anyway, let's return to what the Russian Defense Ministry says. The Kiev regime, defeated in Artyomovsk, started to carry out terrorist attacks. This is the Russian Defense Ministry's account, let me repeat, against civilians. On 22nd May this year, after the intense shelling of the Kazinka International Checkpoint, as well as a number of other civilian facilities in the Grey-Voron district of Belgorod region, a unit of a Ukrainian nationalist formation entered the territory of the Russian Federation. Now, the point about it being a Ukrainian nationalist formation is important because Ukraine itself and the media in the West largely have gone along with the fiction, and I'm afraid it is a fiction, that the people who attacked this border post were in fact anti-Russian, anti-Putin Russian partisans. And I've seen headlines in British media, articles in the British media talking about the anti-Russian, anti-Putin Russian partisans involved in this attack. And there's even been an extraordinary article about how for President Putin and his government, it would be a nightmare that finally Russians have risen up and have taken up arms against his supposedly hated regime. Well, the Russian authorities want to make it absolutely clear that this was an incursion by a Ukrainian unit, military unit, and as a matter of fact, the Russian authorities have gone further and have said, separately from this statement, that every single individual that they have so far identified who participated in this operation, every single individual who was killed or captured, and the Russians do claim to have captured several people, as we will see. Anyway, all of them have been Ukrainian citizens. And note also the expression nationalist formation, which suggests again that this is not exactly a unit of the regular Ukrainian army, but rather a group of people, a unit drawn from these formations, which are now part of the Ukrainian armed forces, though one gets the sense that they're to some extent a law unto themselves, and which have strong ideological perspectives, and which are organized in particular brigades, and who, by the way, make up some of Ukraine's best troops. And Russian media reporters have identified the forces involved in this incursion as having been drawn from the Azov Brigade and the Kraken unit, both of which have particular reputations in Russia, which I'm not going to discuss further in this program. Anyway, the Russian Ministry of Defense then goes on to say, in the course of the counter-terrorist operation, as a result of airstrikes, artillery fire and active action by units of the Western Military District that cover the state border, the nationalist formations have been blocked and destroyed. The remaining nationalists were pushed back into Ukraine, where they continued to be hit until they had been completely eliminated. The enemy losses were over 70 Ukrainian terrorists. Notice the use of the description terrorists to describe these soldiers, though undoubtedly they were part of, well, shall we say, formal military formations. 4 armoured vehicles and 5 pickup trucks. The armed forces of the Russian Federation continue the special military operation. And then we get a long description of what's going on elsewhere on the battlefronts. So the Russians give the impression that most of these people were killed. They give the impression that 70 have been, enemy losses were 70. We know that some of these people were captured, and I suspect that figure 70 is a ballpark figure for both dead and captured on the other side, which gives us some idea of the size of this operation. It appears to have been at company strength, say around 100 men. So not a big operation by any means. But anyway, according to the Russians, it totally failed. And by the way, Russian authorities, the other Russian authorities, have suggested that the Russian armed forces, that's to say the military, the border guards, who are controlled by the FSB, the Russian Counterterrorism and Internal Security Agency, and some police and National Guard formations that also participated in this fight, this firefight, that they suffered no losses at all. Whether or not that's true, I can't, of course, say. And anyway, some, as I said, of these men have been, Ukrainian troops have been captured, others have been killed. Ukrainian losses overall were 70, but according to the Russian Defense Ministry statement, they've all been driven out of Russia. Well, the latter, by the way, might not be entirely true, because since then, we've had a statement from Vyacheslav Gladkov, who is the Russian regional governor, elected regional governor of Belgorod region. And he said, he's reported as saying the following. He says more than 550 people from the Graivoronsky district are staying at temporary accommodation centers in Stary Oskol, Rakitnoye, Ivna, and Stroitel. I also hope that you will be able to return to your homes as soon as law enforcement officers are done mopping up the area. So what does mopping up mean? Does that mean that they think that there are still possibly some Ukrainian fighters still loose? But possibly. I think it's highly likely. I'm guessing that there's also some checks to see that they haven't left explosive devices and other things behind them. But overall, it does seem to me that one can say with a certain measure of confidence that this particular incident has ended. The unit, this Ukrainian unit, tried to break into Belgorod. It didn't penetrate at all far from the border. The Russian border guards, police, National Guard and border guard units were all activated rapidly. They quickly brought the situation under the control, and the Ukrainians were driven back. And Ukraine suffered losses, not perhaps huge losses relative to the state of the fighting in the war as a whole. But I come back to what I was saying yesterday. Whoever ordered this operation, be it Zelensky or one of his officials, perhaps Budanov, who many think has some kind of sway over the operation of these nationalist units in the Ukrainian armed forces. Whoever ordered this operation seems to have been remarkably heedless of the lives of the men who participated in it. Never mind the civilians. Apparently no civilians were killed, several were wounded. However, at least again, that's what the Russian authorities would have us believe. So, whoever it was, as I said, who ordered this operation, seems to have been very heedless of human life, including the lives of their own soldiers. And I have to say, whatever political or psychological or propaganda purpose this operation served, given its predictable and total failure, it hardly seems to me worth trading lives to achieve it. In terms of its propaganda value, I don't know what impact it's had in Ukraine itself. My guess is that by now the Ukrainian population has probably become very jaded and cynical about operations of this kind. But